So the tall claims made by the man of the moment, Dr. Chaulia, let's examine. And as I just mentioned earlier, that as far as the forward of the book is concerned, Janata has written a very absorbing forward. I'm going to just start with you, sir, and then of course, Marshal Chopra. The book focusing on the confrontations or alignments with two adversaries, China and Pakistan, and we've talked about why there are many firsts. Simple and foremost, what is so different about crunch time, in your opinion?
Thank you, first of all, and congratulations, compliments, Dr. Chaulia. And thank you for having me here on this panel today, and thank you for inviting me to write your foreword. What's different about this? I read it at the time when the manuscript was also sent to me. Frankly saying, okay, let me recount it this way.
Sure.
I went to Srinagar about a year ago, and the GOC of 15 Corps asked me to speak to the officers of 15 Corps. So I went and I asked him, what should I speak on? He says, sir, the biggest weakness we have is that the officers of the Indian Army here present know nothing very much about what happened here in the last 30 years. They know everything of what's happening today. But I'm afraid they know very little. There's very little time to recount, to read, etc. And I decided therefore to speak to the officers on the milestones of the 30 years in Kashmir since 1989, including the 19th January 1990 Holocaust. Right? Now I'm just wondering, if someone had the sense to be like Dr. Chaulia and recount, record, review and analyze major events which took place in Kashmir over the last 30 years at different junctures, how well educated we would have been. These 4 events have taken place in the last 8 years only. And he has put them together and reviewed them. The most important part of the review and analysis is that these events are related to national security, they are related to military strategic security, but he brings a brilliant academic content to it. And that's the great thing about this book. When you read it as a comprehensive national security issue, not just military security.
Point taken. Marshal Chopra, this book also is bold enough to say that China is our primary threat and Pakistan comes next. Do you agree? And if yes, why and how? And has he been able to explain that or decode that threat? Pakistan being the subset of China.
Yeah, firstly, heartiest congratulations, Sreeram. I'm a great fan of yours and I must tell you why. One, of course, that you're a prolific writer, writing in a large spectrum, cross-section, everything to do with geopolitics, geostrategy. And I've read the entire book. You sent me about a week back. And I say that with great pride. And I also, I'm so impressed to hear that your family's backing to your books is phenomenal. Because I remember when I was writing my 3rd book, my wife was looking for a divorce lawyer. Honestly, I have now written about 4, but you have written about 100, I know that. So that is the first thing is that, I used to write my book in another room, which was my study, and after some time I realized that since my wife was getting so upset, I moved into our bedroom, had a place to put a study table, so I moved over there. And the next thing she told me was that I see 8 hours of somebody's back.
Marshal Chopra, 3 seconds.
Yeah.
I think the lady, we need to hear the lady.
No comments, please.
Yeah.
We got the answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The second thing I greatly like about Sreeram is his patriotism, nationalism. And I say with pride that I think each one sitting over here on the panel, shares that, feelings of yours about the nation, India first. And I must tell you that my car is parked outside and my car's number is 15th August 1947. Honestly, everybody on the Twitter knows it. and many of ministers of the present.
Chaulia was born on 15th August.
Oh, fantastic.
So was my mother.
Yeah, and a few ministers of this government have actually taken a picture standing next to my car with me. And they are also, those pictures are also
I know what to do next.
No, so that apart, let me come back to the question, because I also happen to be one of the Balakot boys, in the sense that I was the pioneer of the Mirage 2000 fleet, which brought the aeroplanes from France, and I was in the first formation which landed in India, Mirage 2000, and that's the aircraft which was finally used in Balakot. And coming back to Sakal's question, undoubtedly we got two elephants on our side, one dragon, and one side a dragon, and on the other side we have, of course, Pakistan, both nuclear, both having disputes with us on territory, both with, we have had wars with each. None of the wars we started, all the wars started by them, but we fought them well, and we put them in place, including the last one in Ladakh. There are a large number of people in this country, some of the analysts, who keep demoralizing the nation by saying that, oh, China is big, China's got large air power, large army, new technologies, big economy. But my take is very different. I must tell you today that in a Western Theatre Command, the total strength is about 250,000 soldiers. In whole of Western Theatre Command, only 100,000 are on our borders, on the Ellis, 100,000. And you know how much? Nearly 300,000 Indian Army is on the border. That means we are nearly 3 times larger if you see the entire border. How many airfields have they got? They've got about 11 airfields, all dual use, all at high altitude. Only 2 are dedicated Air Force airfields. At best, they can launch, have about 100 offensive aircraft. They can launch, X amount of missions. We have got 25 air bases, all at the sea level across the Chinese border, and we can launch 3 times the air effort that they can launch. So first thing, I want the Indians to feel very confident, especially the young people sitting in the back, that we are, very, very well off as far as both China and Pakistan is concerned. Yes, we are worried, not worried, we are concerned that they both are, working together in unison, they are doing exercises together, they have interoperability of their equipment. Yes, but the issue that we are discussing today is leadership. I see the picture of Prime Minister Modi. I'm a big fan of his. I'm also very proud that he followed me on Twitter. I was his 762 person that he started following on Twitter, and today he has got 2,426 as of this evening that he follows. So I'm very I'm proud of myself. And that picture, I really like the idea of you putting his picture of standing in a tank, Jesse. And I hope that your next book, you will have Prime Minister Modi's picture in a Rafale aircraft.
Okay.
The fighter pilots, that's the next thing I would want you to do is put him in a Rafale aircraft. And I hope that one day Prime Minister Modi will fly, a Rafale, because some of the earlier, presidents, at least some of them have flown. So I know there are more panelists who will speak, and we will get a chance to speak
Please
again.
go ahead, please.
And
Take your time, please.
we are, really proud that we are in a good stand. All these 4 things that you have mentioned, I must mention that I was AOC JNK, that means Head of Air Force in JNK in 2006 and 2007. And with my Army colleagues, we were looking at a large number of launching points that they had around the border. They're all launching points for the terrorists were around 15 kilometers from the border. It is possible for Indian Army to use artillery to fire. They discussed with us, Indian Air Force, as to can you knock off with a standoff weapon from your own side. It is very much possible to take on targets within 15 to 20 kilometers without having to cross your way. In those days, of course, nowadays you have a weapon which can go much deeper. But there was no clear direction, and as was mentioned, in 2008 when this Mumbai blast took place, the Chief of Air Staff, Fali Major, has repeatedly said that as recently as last year, that
he had made an offer. There was a meeting of the then Prime Minister with all the service chiefs, and he had made an offer. The Indian Air Force is the best to go and strike deeper and take on some of the terrorist, I'm so proud that finally, unfortunate Pulwama, but finally Balakot happened, and I can talk at greater length later on about Balakot and how the decision making, how the planning, how the execution took place, and how, जैसे कहते हैं ना, घुस के मार, that is, was finally done. And, I think that we did a good job.
Right. So, Shehzad, this critical or the way opposition has spoken about Pulwama, Balakot, and time and again those television debates where you vociferously defended the government. In nutshell, if you have to compare briefly and critically to the predecessors, Modi regime and predecessors, and the approach to these events that we are talking about.
Thank you, Sakal. First of all, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri ji, and sitting with us, Lieutenant General Syed, Hasnain, Air Marshal Anil Chopra, my dear friend and colleague Aditya Raj Kaul ji, and the man of the moment, Sreeram Chaulia ji. Thank you very much for this wonderful book, which not just encapsulates the transformation of India's national security response, and many people have spoken in great detail about it, but I think what does crunch time mean? I mean, I was just looking at the definition. It's a critical time when decisive action has to be taken. And therefore, I would advise the publishers, I believe Mr. Mehra has already left, that apart from filing this book in bookstores under national security or international relations and other heads, the other area where this book fits in is actually the leadership category. Because this is actually a document of how effective and committed and clear-headed decisive leadership can make all the difference to how a country responds to various national security situations and challenges. So thank you very much and congratulations on yet another book and for surviving with your marriage while writing that book as opposed to the experience that you just heard. You will have to be single like me to write your next book. Nonetheless, now coming to your question, and I remember very interestingly, because I have read half of the book, so I have done little better than Meenakshi ji has. But having read some of the parts, I was recollecting the debates, and Aditya was anchor back then with a very prominent channel. He continues to now work with a new group. I remember some of the debates, and I was called for a debate on. In the aftermath of Pulwama, we had conducted Balakot, and I was invited on a debate. Sakal, you'd remember these debates. And I said, very well, we'll go and debate and discuss it. And what exactly are we going to discuss, and who are the co-panelists? I thought that there might be a few Pakistanis that we might get to, bash on television and tell them that, you deserve this, and we've taken out 200 plus of your terrorists, so better not try to do this again to us. So they told me, no sir, we don't have any guests from Pakistan. I said, okay, maybe then we have experts like Mr. Anil Chopra, Syed Hasnain, perhaps to analyze that, how we can do better and what is the impact or the fallout of such a response. So they said, no sir, we don't have Syed Hasnain and Anil Chopra as well. And I was very surprised to know that we had a discussion that night on 9 p.m. with other political parties of this country. Some of them who said that we should not have gone ahead and done this. Some of them who said that very well you did it, but please show us the dead bodies of those terrorists. And some of them also asking us that ये पुलवामा कहीं मोदी जी को चुनाव जिताने के लिए तो नहीं किया था. This was the 9 p.m. debate at that point of time. I'm glad Sakal did not anchor any of those 9 p.m. debates. But her colleagues definitely did. This was the kind of debates, discussions
Because
that
I
you
was in
were
Pulwama covering.
You were, absolutely. Unfortunately, and this is where Sreeram's book articulates in terms of the leadership quality of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the difference between him and other regimes before him is the fact that he is very clear that his single doctrine towards national security policy is keeping national interest first and not allowing it to be subjected or to be sacrificed at the altar of political interest, domestic vote bank interest, or any kind of parivarik or family interest that might guide certain other political parties when they take such decisions. And how can there be two views on our collective national response when we have just been hit by a terror strike? Why should there be politics on it? I always say it in Hindi कि राष्ट्र नीति पर कभी राजनीति नहीं हो सकती. But unfortunately, what we saw that even on an issue of Rashtra Niti, there was a whole lot of Rajniti. There was an attempt to put Dal Hit, Party Hit, Parivar Hit above Rashtra Hit. This was the kind of response. I remember a lot of the political parties, the Samajwadi Party. I'm sorry, I'm trying to not try and make it political, but there were people who were members of parliament who said that this was not done by Pakistan, but it was done by the security forces in collusion with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. Yeah, very quickly, I'm coming to that. Now see, of course you should attack the BJP and you should attack Prime Minister Modi, and nobody is saying that you should accept everything that we do or everything that we say as correct or as gospel and that we are beyond questioning. Of course there's a time and place to question us, there's a time and place to question our policies and our approach. But in the attempt to show Mr. Modi down, मोदी से नफरत करते करते कम से कम देश और देश की सेना से नफरत मत कीजिए. This is the only refrain that I have. Because in the attempt to try and say that Pulwama was an exercise done by us for political gains, what you allowed was that Pakistan could go to the international forums and say, देखिए पर इन्हीं के सांसद, their MPs are saying that this was an internal job. And therefore, what has changed between the earlier regimes and Prime Minister Modi's government is the fact that earlier there were many considerations. Mr. Chopra is absolutely right. Fali Major ji had said to Manmohan Singh, and perhaps he went to the wrong office, he should have perhaps gone to 10 Janpat, I believe, then he could have had some way ahead, but he went to Manmohan Singh ji saying that this is the response we should give after 26/11. But forget giving that response, we could not even take away the most favored nation status from Pakistan. This was our response at that time. And now if you contrast that to what has happened in the aftermath of Uri attack, in the aftermath of Pulwama, there is a decisive narrative and decisive doctrine that if you try and mess with us, then you will get it back. Whatever is the world response, we will see, we will take care about that, but that will not hinder us from taking the response that we need to take to secure our national interests. And in a sense, many people compare it with the Israeli response. And it is a good narrative and it's a good operating procedure, because there should be fear in the minds of those who think about targeting or touching India or trying to put any kind of obstruction in our national security. And finally, I would just like to say that vote bank interests, what will my vote bank think if I take a particular decision, or I should oppose a particular decision because it might affect a particular vote bank? This cannot be the consideration when you are taking decisions for national security. सरकारें आती हैं, सरकारें जाती हैं, but हमारे जो राष्ट्रीय हित होते हैं वो स्थायी होते हैं. Those are permanent interests. There was once a time Narasimha Rao ji sent Vajpayee ji to argue the case for India on India's behalf, because he knew that Vajpayee might be the opposition leader, but he will keep India's interests above everything else when he will go and argue India's case. Today, if you see in Parliament, when Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary stands up, and even on an issue of just domestic consideration, whether it's removal of Article 3, it has nothing to do with Pakistan. Even on that, our leaders stand up and say we should have consulted Pakistan first. That is the difference. Thank you.
Consulting how important is political consensus when it comes to national security domain. That's going to be my next round of questions. But Aditya, coming to you quickly. Now, this book has dedicated chapters on Doklam, on Balakot, about Ladakh, and Aditya is somebody who has covered these events from the ground. So have I, but because he's here, so I'm going to basically ask you an assessment as a journalist. The points made by distinguished panel here about the decisive factor, about the security first factor, and you were on ground. I remember Pulwama. Earlier regime, this regime, and the whole media lens, ma'am, the way we had to report. Were there any filters? Were there any directions? And this book actually gives us a blow-by-blow account as to what happened. Aditya, how was it covered?
Thank you so much, Sakal. Firstly, congratulations again, Sreeram. I've had the pleasure of hosting him on several debates in the past and plan to host him again in the future documentaries that I make. Congratulations on writing such a fantastic book. I have not read the book, but I have read excerpts from each chapter to understand what this really means. And as Sakal pointed out, I have lived these moments. I have actually on ground reported this, not just from on ground in Jammu and Kashmir or near China, LAC, but also interacted with key players, including people in the PMO or in the national security apparatus, including NSA Ajit Doval. So, what this government really believes in is not being status quo. The government really believes in being a disruptor of sorts, or perhaps bringing in a paradigm shift. So, three key things that I personally see, and some of the speakers spoke about, including Madam Minister, was first, of course, Balakot, that brought a paradigm shift on how India's strategic responses would be, and set a benchmark that every time there is going to be any kind of a terror attack, you at least expect this to happen, or we can even grow bigger than that. Second has been, of course, the abrogation of Article 370. So I was invited by the government to submit a report on the security in J&K. I gave them a 7-page concise things on what exactly needs to happen, and this was in June 2019. And I'm happy to report that 80% of what I actually mentioned has been actually implemented by the government. So they are actually doers, certainly, but at the same time, there's much more that needs to be done. Third, of course, just like Madam Minister spoke about, others also, was vaccine Maitri, the COVID-19 pandemic and how it handled. And I criticized the government as well. I stayed in Uttar Pradesh for the last 1.5 years, and I criticized the government, in Uttar Pradesh particularly, on how things unfolded initially. Then they caught up and certainly did well. But the kind of response globally visible in several countries, the kind of gift that we gave through Vaccine Maitri was phenomenal. I haven't seen in the past at such a level, such cooperation and such blessings, coming in way of the government from across the globe. And of course, the most recent one, and you'd be happy to know that I've just completed a documentary which is called Airlift. And yesterday, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh was gracious enough to inaugurate that at Taj Palace. And the Airlift is a documentary on the success of Operation Ganga that was recently concluded. So we spoke to the students, we spoke to Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, and tomorrow I'll be interacting with the External Affairs Minister as well. So imagine 22,500 students being rescued from a war territory between Ukraine and Russia. And as Madam also mentioned, both friends. What kind of a catch-22 situation it is for us. And this comes at a time when US and China particularly gave a statement that we cannot have a rescue operation for our citizens. So comes India, Operation Ganga happens. Of course, a lot of political debate happened here in India about how the rescue will happen. Were the advisories issued? Why weren't people rescued in advance? But one needs to understand that once there is a war territory, the dynamics completely change. The rules of the game completely change. The law of the land, even in a democratic setup, completely changes. So we have to work around that kind of a system, and that's what Minister Jaishankar, of course led by Prime Minister, did when they met morning and evening. And I have followed that closely, so I understand what kind of a Herculean task it really was. But particularly talking about the internal security dynamics and of course international affairs. Unfortunately, I have to say this, that earlier there was a status quo. How things unfolded were watched very closely, but the common Indian waited for a response to happen. It didn't happen. The biggest of the examples which he also talks about is, of course, 2611, where the Indian government had options. We know it. It's been extensively written in the media also, that there were particular people who actually went to the government and said, these are the options before us. I think the NSA of that time also mentioned this extensively in his book about what the options were, but we did not take that call. Why did Prime Minister Modi only take that call is the question right now. Why did the paradigm shift only happen this time is the question. Why did we have the surgical strike at that particular time and then the Balakot strike and finally Article 370 abrogation? I have seen, over the last 20 to 25 years, J&K politicians talk about how, 370 abrogation cannot happen. It is a part and parcel of our life, and no shoulder will be left in J&K to unfurl the tricolour if this abrogation happens. A certain politician, a huge figure in J&K, former chief minister, also said that you change my name, if the abrogation really happens. It happened. It restored equality. Now I say this, vociferously, that BJP needs to do a lot more. And when a certain person from the PMO asked me 6 months before the abrogation that what should happen, what do you think about abrogation? I said, Meri bola se to abhi kariye, it should happen. It should have happened decades ago. And I remember, because I was researching, it was in the 60s perhaps when Atal Bihari Vajpayee first time spoke about it inside the parliament. There's a 10-page speech that he gave, and he was the first person to actually talk about the abrogation, and he mentions in that 10-page speech कि अगर आप आज ये नहीं करेंगे, ये आगे के लिए आपकी security के लिए बहुत बड़ा nightmare बनेगा, and that's what happened. So we need to learn from our mistakes in the past. This government perhaps has conducted some kind of an audit of our mistakes of the past and is perhaps learning slowly. Now, I'm not saying that this government is not committing mistakes. They have been committing mistakes and certainly would be learning and relearning. But the perception earlier that in our strategic pursuits, in our response, in our global standing, we have changed. And that needs to be accepted. And I am of the firm belief that whenever it comes to national security, whenever it comes to core areas, all political beliefs need to come together. Unfortunately, just like Shehzad mentioned, there are times when the Congress, the Aam Aadmi Party or others question the government on issues where the interests of the armed forces are there, where the interests of the common Indian are there, where the interests of our sovereignty are there. And there shouldn't be a debate on that. I even tell the BJP that in governments where others are in power, other political parties are in power, the BJP needs to rise up to the occasion and support them. And in the most recent, people might say that this is not the occasion to speak about it, but I will briefly about the recent film that has been a huge debate all across, the Kashmir Files. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that truth. Now, I have lived that truth. I was just 9 months old when that entire episode happened. And we know what the Chief Minister of Delhi spoke about the film. I have no qualms with him when he questions the BJP. He actually goes all guns blazing against Modi or anybody in the ruling government. That's his right. He needs to do that. I appreciate his activism in the past. I know him since last almost 20 years. But when he says that this ye jhoothi film hai, this is a lie, it hurts us. It hurts the victims. And it hurts us all. I hope he apologizes. I hope he realizes that the ye jhoothi film nahi hai. This is the reality that we have lived through. And today I tweeted that I'm the happiest if Aam Aadmi Party actually enters J&K, and we need political parties like AAP to actually rise to the occasion to actually build democracy in Jammu and Kashmir, and that will bring a paradigm shift also. Why should only Kashmir have a hegemony, in this entire political setup in J&K? So I will be reading this book immediately because this almost runs like a thriller for me, because I have lived there. If I recount, I've covered the Uri terror attack. I was there in Kashmir. Last month I was again in Uri to pay obeisances there. I have covered the Pathankot terror attack, and actually with the Raksha Mantri Manohar Parrikar at that time, I actually entered the field when the grenades and the dead bodies were still there. Apart from that, of course, Balakot and Pulwama. I was recently again in Pulwama. We're working on a film around it. So these are issues that we need to study in depth. And I always, while I praise the government, I also talk about what we lack. So I'll leave it with that. One of the big issues here, and which General Hasnain Saab has written extensively about, you should read him, is about information warfare. And this is the biggest, problem here. I praise the government that, a dynamic approach was shown in 370. A lot of shift in foreign policy was visible. They controlled the local politics and dynamism as well. But what happens? With the government narrative on one side, and on the other side, the Western criticism, we've seen the pieces that have been written by the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or the BBC, etc. And in the middle is the 9 p.m. rhetoric that happens on the news debates that we are guilty of. We do not get the nuance, the in-depth. So I praise him for actually writing this concise book. You can actually read this in 2 or 3 days completely if you are really interested in that topic. So I request you to read this to understand what really happened, but then give a thought of, while we did this paradigm shift, were we able to convey this to the global audience? Where did we fail? So I give these guest lectures in the Internal Security Academy and CRPF Academy and elsewhere, where I tell them that it's important to bring the paradigm shift, certainly. It is important to have a dynamic approach to learn from what's happening currently overall. But it's most important in the recent times, in the current times of social media, to have an upper hand on information. We failed, unfortunately, a little on this, both on Balakot and 370. With Asif Ghafoor, what happened. My personal opinion, many may not agree with me, but we can do better with that. And that's where I leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aditya. India's global standing and the acceptance of that, Janata, that bit. And the book talks about the arguments that Dr. Chaulia has put in place, how Prime Minister Modi has turned the whole world in favor, quote unquote, of India, and are we really ready for 2 war fronts, Pakistan and China, and the role our friends Russia and US can play in these conflicts that we have with these 2 adversaries. Are you satisfied with Dr. Chaulia's arguments?
Firstly, I suppose this will be the last round of questions.
Well,
I spoke 3 minutes out of the 40 minutes which have gone so far. Right? But doesn't matter. We were brilliant panelists with us. Let me start by saying something. After this event is over, going back home, what am I going to do? I'm going to get on to my favorite channel these days, Doordarshan.
thank you.
You got to go and see Doordarshan to see the transformation that can happen. Okay? And on Doordarshan, what am I going to discuss? I asked the coordinator, what are you discussing? They said, sir, AFSPA. I said, amazing. AFSPA kya ho gaya? I had not read the newspapers. I had not read the news till then. And I came to know AFSPA is being removed from the Northeast. Our decision hua hai. What a milestone.
Some of the districts.
Not removed technically, the disturbed areas are reduced.
Yeah, I am an AFSPA man.
We are pro AFSPA, I'm removing it.
I am an AFSPA man. At the time when everyone was trying to remove AFSPA from Kashmir, it was my face which held AFSPA there. Right? I am aware that disturbed areas, that you have to first declare an area as disturbed to allow AFSPA to be prevalent there. The fact that we are removing AFSPA in these areas progressively over a period of time obviously reflects a courage and it reflects a confidence. Why haven't we removed it all these years? This is exactly what this book is talking about. The cascading events of the last 8 years have led to a strategic confidence. Right? It's not me said in so many words, but that is exactly what has happened. Let's recount. Mr. Modi made a brave effort of making peace with Pakistan, starting with UFA in 2015. He sent Mr. Doval to Bangkok to meet the Pakistani NSA. He sent Sushma Swaraj ji to Islamabad to attend the Heart of Asia conference. Most people, these things are forgotten. I mean, these 4 lovely, wonderful events, but you got to fill in the other things into it. And thereafter, After all this, he surprised the world on the 25th of December by landing up in Lahore to attend the wedding of the granddaughter of Nawaz Sharif, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. I mean, these were transformational things which were happening. The deep state of Pakistan could not accept it. It just could not accept it. 7 days later, Pathankot happened. And that's how the narrative of this starts, of your book starts. Or narrative from Pathankot, it led to Burhan Wani's death on the 8th of July 2016. It led to Uri. It led to the surgical strikes. It led to the Nagrota terrorist attack on the 29th of November 2016. It led to Docklam subsequently, 72 days of standoff. It led to Operation All Out in 2018. Let's not forget these events. These are very, very important events which have contributed to the strategic confidence of India. And then 2018 onwards, 2019 came 14th of February came Pulwama and 26th of February came Balakot. And finally the last coffin, the last nail in the coffin, the 5th of August decision on Article 370. Now if you were sitting on the other side of the LSC or LOC, what would you be observing? Look at this nation which could not take decisions to respond even with a trigger as serious as 2611 has now decided to wake up. And this nation, if not coerced now, if not cautioned now, will become a menace for China and for Pakistan. The very reason why the April 2020 standoff started in Ladakh at the time of the pandemic was because of the rising strategic confidence of India. The Chinese had no other reason to do it. Prime Minister Modi has extended a hand of friendship and it was being responded to. They realized our strength in Dockland, but subsequently when they must have assessed everything, they must have realized that this nation, under this leadership, under this government, is going beyond our accepted levels. And that is what led to what is happening even today on the LEC. So along with strategic confidence comes a lot of other factors. They impinge on you respond to them, and you become stronger. The fact that we can remove AFSPA now, or whatever way you want to say, to remove the Disturbed Areas Act from certain districts and certain states, if that kind of confidence can come today, is because of this cascading events which have happened over a period of time. The way that you can undertake Operation Ganga also comes from the confidence which has come over the last 8 years. You couldn't have undertaken this kind of an operation if you were hesitant, if you didn't have the standing in the world, if you, with the NATO, with Russia, with Ukraine, with everyone. And 22,000 of us, of our students and young men and women stuck there. Obviously the world was looking at this whole operation going on at that particular time. So there's no doubt about it what Dr. Chaulia says in this analysis, in this book, the rediscovery of India, virtually. The rediscovery of our strategic confidence, which has happened over a period of time, event to event to event, learning our lessons. That's the more important thing, learning our lessons from time to time. And hopefully, Mr. Wang Yi comes to Delhi quietly, hoping like hell that he can make and have an access to Prime Minister Modi and tell him, please come for the BRICS conference this year. And he's told very clearly, you can't meet Mr. Modi. Can you imagine a time when the Chinese would come to Delhi and someone would tell the Chinese, you can't meet the Prime Minister if the Foreign Minister of China comes? This comes from the confidence. This comes from the confidence that you have today. And that confidence has come about because of a chain of events over a period of time, so beautifully captured in this book. Thank you.
So as we are, Marshal Chopra, talking about this confidence of India that has forced an unscheduled visit of a Chinese diplomat here, is today's Bharat more safe from adversaries like India and Pakistan. And what I'm trying to ask you, this security first doctrine, has this forced the expansionist designs of China or our dear neighbor Pakistan to change their diplomacy or strategic calculus towards India? क्या हमने उनको सोचने पे मजबूर किया है? As claimed in this book.
You know, first thing I must tell you that we in military are very clear. We like strong leaders. We like people who lead from the front. We like people who take decisions, good or bad. They must take decisions. And in that context, politics apart, this book apart, I must tell you that as a youngster, I was a great fan of Lal Bahadur Shastri, the way he handled Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan and 1965 war. I greatly appreciated Indira Gandhi for the way she handled 1971 war. She led from the front and, we built the nation, another nation, all, and of course the armed forces did their job, and so did the diplomats. Then I was a great fan of Narasimha Rao for the way he recovered the economy of this country. He led again from the front. So the point we are making is people who have led from the front. Prime Minister Modi is not only leading from front, he is leaving footprints on the sands of time. He is making policy decision changes. In every facet, from small things to water, to households, to electricity, to every aspect of our life, he is making a difference. And on security aspects, I must tell you, since all of us have worked in J&K, 370 has made a difference, not to India's security, also to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The people are so much happy. You see, there be no terrorist attack, no big terrorist attack for long, and touch wood, and I hope it never happens. So strong decisions. How he managed the parliament to get 370 through. It requires. They didn't have the majority in Rajya Sabha surely. So the point I'm saying is, if the Prime Minister of the country, if he's strong, he's clear-headed, he wants to get a thing through, he will get it through. Didn't the previous Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, manage to get the nuclear thing going, even in whatever manner he managed? So all these 4 incidents that we have covered in this book, it is the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, which is very, very clear. And the signal has gone not only to Pakistan and China, but into the entire world that India first. Did you ever think that the countries of OIC, West Asia, they all want to be friends more with India than with Pakistan? Why? Because of leadership. The way one-to-one contact you have made, and you have made it clear to the whole world that India is an important country, it's an important, it's a democracy, it's not arm twisting anybody, it's a great market, we are a rising power. Lots and lots of things have been conveyed by the present leadership, and I must tell you, if you see the approval ratings around the world, and it's not me, it's the Western press which is telling you, the approval rating of our Prime Minister is much, much higher than most leaders of the world. So that is the kind of respect, and of course, whether it's Wang Yi is now coming, everybody is coming to India. You see the British, the Ukrainian, the Russian, everybody is heading towards India in the last few days. And in the coming days, everybody is going to be coming. The importance of India. And, in spite of the pressure that's coming from the West, especially USA, and kind of statements that have been made by President Biden, India has stood its ground. Strategic autonomy, India first. And that is the kind of signal that our Prime Minister is giving. And I really want to say that when it comes to foreign policy, I think the opposition, everybody must stand together with the government. This is very, very important. The kind of differences that are there between Republicans and Democrats in America, 50-50. All the time they are fighting each other. But when it comes to Ukraine, whether it comes to Russia, whether it comes to Europe, everybody is speaking the same language. And that's something I think we need to do. And I leave it to the politicians to handle this part.
Yes, Mr. Politician, the question next was how How
Aditya as a politician yet.
I'm being neutral, I'm a moderator, and I'm Doordarshan, so we don't take sides. Anyway. Alright. Okay. So how important is dissent for you? How important is political consensus on very, very critical matters of national security for your government? As explained in this book, the whole political leadership and how it mobilized public opinion. And I think credit for that goes to TV channels, journalists as well, little bit, not much. So how important is that for your government?
You see, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji does not worry about ratings, whether it is from domestic television channels or international agencies, and therefore his actions are not guided by populism, but his actions are guided by what is right for India. And therefore, even if it is a difficult decision, he will take that decision irrespective of how it might be politically opposed by some people who may have advocated the same thing when they were in power. I'll give you an example of it. If you remember, the Congress party on various other initiatives also had actually taken a stand when they were in power, and when those very issues like the GST and others were pushed forward by Prime Minister Narendra Modi for whatever reason, the tenure. But the manner in which then they opposed it, it only showed that perhaps the reasons why they were opposing it were not driven by genuine concerns about the plane not being the best. It was driven by certain other considerations. The manner in which, when we were eye-to-eye confrontation in Doklam, you remember there were pictures that later on surfaced of Rahul Gandhi having a meeting with the Chinese diplomat, and that gave a very wrong signal that at the one end your Indian army is standing eye-to-eye, and on the other hand an opposition leader, and even if the people may not take him seriously, but he is still a member of parliament, represents the oldest party in parliament. And therefore, very irresponsible action taken by him. His statements on 370, which were used by Pakistan in their dossier to the United Nations. So, the advice, see, of course it is necessary that everybody should be on the same page. But if these political parties don't realize that for their petty political gains, they are going to try and put national interest at stake, they themselves will be reduced to the margins of Indian politics like they have been already reduced. And therefore, I think the people of India are very, very smart, and they have already sent out a strong message that there are certain issues on which, of course, the government must be held accountable. It's a democracy. It's not a dictatorship. You must ask us difficult questions. But ironically, Rahul Gandhi believes that tweeting on Twitter is the most effective way of demanding accountability than actually going and attending meeting of standing committee of external affairs or other committees that he's a part of. And therefore, that role, there's always space for dissent, there is always space for questioning and accountability, but the manner in which you articulate it should not seem that you have certain vested interests. For instance, just last example, on China, if you see the manner in which the Congress party, when they were in power, how they dealt with China, we literally surrendered our economic interests, our trade deficit balloon, the manner in which there were so many incursions. It has been documented by various people who served in that government at that point of time, the manner in which the response was given, and we also know that there was a memorandum of understanding between the Congress party and the Chinese Communist Party. Now those are things that the Congress party has not come out clear about, and therefore when people see them taking positions which doubt the bravery of our soldiers in Galwan, when they say that the tricolour is not fluttering high, what did they do about creation of infrastructure? That's a whole new topic. Mr. A.K. Antony had once got up in Parliament and said that not creating infrastructure is the best strategy when it comes to dealing with China. We will leave our LAC without infrastructure. So these kinds of things, people question themselves that is there a hidden hand or a hidden reason because of which Congress party takes these stands. And I think that for them and for all other parties, including Aam Aadmi Party and others, please question us, but please, the intent must be clean. It should not be that to just make one political point against Narendra Modi ji, that you raise doubts over the army. You know, ironically, Osama, when he was taken out by the Americans, it was announced by Barack Obama. It was not announced by the American army. And when surgical strike was conducted, it was announced by the DGM. A military officer came and did press conference, unlike a political personality. Yet in India you saw that people questioned कि proof दिखा दो surgical strike कितने लोग मारे गए, whereas nobody from the Republicans, no matter how much they hated Barack Obama, ever once went up to him and said कि please Osama की body दिखा दो. This is the difference.
So political consensus is must, but when and if need arises, this government will go all out guns blazing. No compromises on that. And Aditya, just 10 seconds because Dr. Chaulia is really looking at me. Stop being an anchor. Okay, 2 minutes. He's being gracious enough. 2 minutes to you, and I have one quick question for you as you thank the audience and our distinguished guests. Aditya, I'm not going to ask you anything. Just to take 2 minutes, and why one should read Crunch Time.
Although I've worked in channels where they do not believe in 2 minutes, I'll try to make it and sum it up in 2 minutes. I'll give you 2 examples and I'll just wrap it up there. And this is about the rhetoric and the kind of political disturbances that we are witnessing in our neighborhood, in Pakistan right now. In the last 2 years, there were 2 significant statements that came out. Many of you might have heard it, some of you might have missed it, so I'll just recount that. Bilawal Bhutto, one of the key opposition leaders right now, son of Benazir Bhutto, said in a speech in Muzaffarabad, कि Imran Khan, and he said, नालायक Imran Khan की policy ऐसी हो गई है कि एक समय पे हमारा पाकिस्तान का policy होता था कि श्रीनगर कब लेंगे, और अब वो तब्दीली आ गई है कि इमरान खान, नालायक इमरान खान की वजह से, इसकी policy की वजह से ये हुआ है कि हम मुजफ्फराबाद पाकिस्तान occupied Kashmir में कैसे बचाएंगे. So this perhaps in many ways signifies what's been happening there and what the correct measures and the course correction that Prime Minister Modi has done and the Indian government and the Indian armed forces in particular have done has resulted in. The second statement came just few days ago amidst this entire crisis, and this is from Prime Minister Imran Khan himself. You might have heard the OIC met in Islamabad. And Imran Khan, while addressing, and before that he had also praised India's foreign policy and the balance that India had committed to. He said, we have been a failure. Now he said the OIC has been a failure. And he said Pakistan has been a failure in OIC too. What happened after 370 abrogation? Pakistan went running to the OIC that a special session on Kashmir would be called, and there will be a diplomatic assault on India, on New Delhi. But nothing happened. Maldives, UAE, Saudi, all of them said that this is an internal matter of India. The Muslim world also did not stand with Pakistan, not just on Kashmir, on any of the issues. The kind of personal bonhomie or the relationship that Prime Minister Modi or the Ministry of External Affairs or Minister Jaishankar has with Middle East, what we call West Asia, or other countries has been phenomenal. So we will have to recognize that. The shift that has happened. The consistency is the question now that needs to be maintained. On the national security back in India as well, as many of the panelists explained, 370 has been a game changer. To capitalize on that, to build on the consistency is the question now. To end the corruption that was there, corruption linked with terrorism is the question. Will you be able to restore democracy? Even if elections do not happen in J&K, will the system be clean enough that the common people have that kind of a confidence in democracy is the big question right now. Now he has proven, the political opponents may say anything, but he has brought a paradigm shift. He has changed the course of history on several significant issues. And before you see television channels, before you go in-depth analysis or hear others, I would all request you again to read my friend Sreeram's book again, and I hope you write even more further on this issue, because people tend to go in detail and write pages about it. You, in a very concise manner, have also recounted what happened and then gave an analysis, an answer to the crises that happened. So thank you very much for writing this book. Kudos to you, and a big round of applause.
Sreeram, we want you here.
Thank you audience, and thank you amazing panel, and what more can we do? I mean, we have recorded it, so we hope thousands more will watch it on YouTube shortly. This entire event will go online by tomorrow or day after in bits, and I think the level of the discourse that we have seen here is very high nature. These are all very distinguished professionals in the national security field. I could not have asked for more than this. Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, all the gentlemen on the stage, and Meenakshi Lekhi ji, all of them have actually raised the expectations about my book. I hope you'll all read it. And
the next book?
The next book. You see, as a social scientist, I observe the empirical realities. So it will take me a little while, maybe 2-3 years, to see a new trend emerging. My last book was about the Trump phenomenon. Before that, I had one on Modi's foreign policy. So we'll see. I mean, this decade is going to be very challenging. A lot of geopolitical contestations. Severe rivalries among major powers. Wars. We are already seeing a major war in the heart of Europe. So I think these are interesting times, and I promise that I will keep my eye on the ball. I want to thank all of you for being here. Special thanks to Sakal Bhatt. She's such an amazing moderator. What can I say? I mean, I've been with shows on her for the last almost 12 years now, and it continues to amaze with the level of engagement and discussion that she generates. Thank you, Sakal, for the time you've given. Thank you to everybody. Thank you especially to Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, because she really summed up the whole book for all of us, and that makes a lot of difference. Thank you, audience. Thank you so much for being here. And